Somewhere in your kitchen right now, there is probably a piece of chocolate. Maybe in a drawer, maybe in your bag, and you've probably never thought twice about it. But 3,000 years ago, that same substance was worth more than gold. People didn't eat it for pleasure. They drank it to speak with gods. They paid soldiers with it. They used it in ceremonies where blood and cacao were poured together as offerings. This is the story of how a bitter, blood-red drink from the rainforests of Central America became the sweetest, most addictive product on the planet. And almost everything you think you know about chocolate's beginning is wrong. It didn't start in Europe. It didn't start sweet. And for most of its history, nobody ate it at all. The story begins deep in the jungles of what is now southern Mexico, more than 3,000 years ago, with a tree that shouldn't have been valuable at all. The cacao tree grows small, strange pods directly out of its trunk, packed with bitter seeds surrounded by a slimy white pulp. On their own, those seeds taste nothing like chocolate. They're intensely bitter, almost impossible to eat raw. But the Olmec people, one of the earliest civilizations in the Americas, discovered something remarkable. If you ferment the pulp, dry the seeds, roast them, and grind them into a paste, something transforms. The bitterness deepens into something rich and complex. And when mixed with water, that paste becomes a drink unlike anything else in the ancient world. Archaeologists found the proof in an unlikely place. Residue on pottery shards, dated to around 1900 BCE, containing theobromine, a chemical compound found almost exclusively in cacao. That residue rewrote the timeline of chocolate's history entirely. It meant the Olmec weren't just eating cacao. They had already figured out how to process it. But it was the Maya who turned that discovery into something sacred. To the Maya, cacao wasn't food. It was divine. Their own mythology claimed the gods discovered cacao hidden inside a mountain and gave it to humanity as a gift from the underworld itself. They didn't sweeten it. They spiced it with chili, cornmeal, and flowers, then poured it back and forth between two vessels from a height, creating a thick, bitter foam on top. That foam wasn't a side effect. It was the entire point. The foam was considered the most sacred part of the drink, and this drink didn't belong to everyone. Cacao was reserved for royalty, warriors, and priests. It appeared in wedding ceremonies. It was offered to the gods in rituals, sometimes poured over sacrificial victims as an offering meant to nourish both the divine and the dead. Maya nobles were even buried with vessels of chocolate, meant to sustain them in the afterlife. You'd think something this sacred would stay confined to temples and palaces. It didn't, because cacao beans turned out to be useful for something far more practical than religion. They became money. By the time the Aztec Empire rose to dominate central Mexico, cacao beans functioned as actual currency. A rabbit might cost you 30 beans. A slave could be purchased for around 100. Historical records even describe counterfeiters hollowing out real cacao beans and stuffing them with dirt or wax to pass off fake currency, which tells you just how seriously people valued them. The problem for the Aztecs was that cacao trees didn't grow well in their high-altitude capital of Tenochtitlan. They had to acquire it through trade and tribute from conquered regions in the lowlands, which meant chocolate became not just a religious symbol, but a tool of empire. Entire provinces were required to pay their taxes in cacao beans. Emperor Moctezuma himself reportedly drank enormous quantities of a spiced, frothy cacao beverage daily, sometimes described by Spanish witnesses as being consumed from golden cups, discarded after a single use. And that's exactly where everything was about to change. In 1519, Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived in the Aztec Empire. What he witnessed stunned him. A civilization where a strange, bitter drink was treated as more valuable than gold itself. The Spanish tried it and, according to most historical accounts, hated it. Too bitter, too spicy. Nothing like anything in Europe. You'd think that would have been the end of chocolate's story outside the Americas. For nearly 100 years after that, Spain kept chocolate almost entirely secret from the rest of Europe. It was a luxury reserved for royal courts, guarded as one of the empire's most valuable trade commodities. But secrets like that never last. By the 1600s, chocolate had spread to France, Italy, and England, where it appeared in fashionable chocolate houses, elite social clubs where the wealthy gathered to drink the exotic beverage and gossip about politics. But there was a dark cost hidden behind every fashionable cup. As European demand for cacao exploded, plantation owners needed a massive, cheap labor force to meet it. That demand became one of the driving forces behind the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of enslaved Africans were forced to work on cacao plantations across the Caribbean and South America. The luxury enjoyed in European drawing rooms was built directly on unimaginable human suffering, a connection between chocolate and forced labor that, disturbingly, has never fully disappeared, even today. For centuries, chocolate remained a drink. Thick, oily, and difficult to digest. Nobody had figured out how to turn it into something you could bite. Then, in 1828, a Dutch chemist named Coenraad van Houten changed everything. He invented a press that could separate cacao butter from the cacao solids and treated the remaining powder with alkaline salts to make it mix more smoothly with water. This process, now known as Dutching, didn't just improve the drink. It created a surplus of pure cacao butter, an ingredient nobody previously knew what to do with in large quantities. That surplus became the missing piece of a puzzle nobody had realized existed. In 1847, the British company Fry's used that cacao butter, combined with cacao powder and sugar, to create the very first solid, moldable chocolate bar. For the first time in 3,000 years, chocolate could be eaten instead of drunk. Everything accelerated from there. Swiss chocolatier Daniel Peter spent years experimenting with a new problem: how to combine chocolate with milk without the mixture spoiling. His breakthrough came through an unlikely partnership using powdered milk technology developed by his neighbor, a man named Henri Nestlé. Together, they created milk chocolate in 1875, a product so smooth and sweet it would eventually dominate the entire global market. Meanwhile, in America, a candy maker named Milton Hershey saw something few others did: that chocolate didn't have to stay a luxury item for the wealthy. It could be mass-produced, affordable, and sold to everyone. He built an entire factory town around this idea and turned chocolate from an aristocratic indulgence into something ordinary people could buy for pocket change. By the early 20th century, something extraordinary had happened. A substance once reserved for Aztec emperors and Maya priests had become one of the most common foods on the planet, sold in corner shops, vending machines, and eventually gas stations everywhere. But the deeper, uncomfortable history never fully vanished. Today, roughly 2/3 of the world's cacao comes from West Africa, primarily Ivory Coast and Ghana. And investigations have repeatedly revealed that child labor and, in some documented cases, forced labor, still exist within parts of the cacao supply chain, echoing the exploitation of centuries earlier in disturbing ways. Major chocolate companies have made public commitments to eliminate these practices, yet as of recent years, watchdog organizations report the problem remains far from solved. So the next time you unwrap a chocolate bar, in that brief second before it melts on your tongue, you're tasting more than sugar and cacao. You're tasting 3,000 years of history. A sacred offering poured over Maya sacrifices. A currency valuable enough to buy a human life in the Aztec Empire. A secret Spain tried to hide from the rest of Europe. A luxury built on the suffering of enslaved people. And a Dutch chemist's invention that finally turned a bitter, divine drink into the everyday sweetness billions of people now take completely for granted. Chocolate never stopped being valuable. It just stopped being rare. And somewhere, deep in the historical irony of it all, the ancient Maya word for cacao, still survives almost unchanged in the modern word we use today. Cacao, the god's gift, now sitting